Part 87. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 862. The old woman glanced at everyone and said, "It's getting late, let's go in." The woman named Niju bowed to her and led everyone into the valley in front, and her figure gradually disappeared. After they went in, the fourth elder went straight to a row of wooden houses outside the valley. In the largest wooden house, there were more than 10 figures, and the eighth elder was among them. He glanced at the fourth elder and turned his head away with a gloomy face. The rest of the people were men and women. An old man looked at her and asked, "The fourth vein came so late, I guess you have got the love goo." The fourth elder glanced at him and said, "The second elder doesn't need to worry about it." Another old woman snorted coldly and said, "Do you really think that you can get the position of the saint by getting the love goo? It's not certain who will win or lose. The battle for the saint is a major event for the Wangu sect and Kyandi. During this period of time, the 10 elders will stay here and wait for the final result." Although it was a consensus among all of them that a saint must be chosen as soon as possible to reunite the Wangu sect, which had already collapsed, they still argued over who to choose as the saint. The saint was the core of the Wangu sect and the absolute leader of the section. There was no doubt that whichever lineage won the position of saint would be the first of the 10 lines in the future, and no one was willing to give up this opportunity. Several people made sarcastic remarks to each other, and suddenly someone looked around and said in surprise, "Why is Uzun not here?" Uzun was the 9th elder, and the 10 elders gathered here, but Uzun was the only one missing. It was incredible that one of the 10 elders was absent on such an important occasion. Someone said, "The people of the 9th lineage did not see her when they entered the forest. It is said that she was in seclusion to comprehend the Gu technique and has not come out for 3 months. The reason why the 9th elder was absent was explained, and everyone stopped discussing the matter. They were already wary of each other, and even under the same roof, they did not communicate much. The old woman just walked in from outside and nailed a piece of cloth to the wall. There are 10 pieces of cloth like this on the wall, and each piece has 11 names written on it, including a candidate for the saint and 10 saint guardians. If one of the candidates eventually becomes a real saint, these 10 people will be the top leaders of the church, and it is not impossible for them to become the 10 elders in the future. Of course, the premise is that they can survive in the Wangu forest. Because the mission of these 10 people is to protect the candidate saint to become a real saint. For this mission, they can pay anything, including their lives. In fact, in the competition for saints over the years, the guardians paid their lives for this, and even the situation of annihilation of the whole army often occurred. Whether those saint candidates can defeat their opponents in the Wangu forest and laugh to the end, these 10 saint guardians play a vital role. Therefore, for these 10 guardians, each lineage will send the strongest lineup in the tribe. For other lines, they not only care about who the other party's candidate saint is, but also care about the other party's saint guardian. If a Gudeo master of the 10 elders level sneaks in, it will be a fatal blow to the other veins. Because of this, they have made a rule that the age of the guardian must not be older than 30 years old. 2 guardians of the 3rd vein have been promoted to blue clothes, and they are only 18 years old. So what, there are 2 in the 7th vein. The saint selected by the 10th vein, is Han Chinese. Looking at the name on the cloth, someone seemed to find something unusual. After everyone gathered around to take a look, they all frowned and looked at a figure in the corner. That was the elder of the 10th vein. She just used a Chinese name. What's so strange about that? The 10th elder glanced at the 4th elder and said, "Isn't there a person named Tang Ningning in the lineage of Elder Xin? The Gu tribe has its own writing and language, and their naming is also different from that of the Han people. However, as the exchanges between the Gu tribe and the Han people deepen, some of them will also give themselves a Han Chinese name. Today, there are already many Gu people with Chinese names, and Chinese names are gradually being recognized in Guizhou. Moreover, The 10th clan has a close relationship with the former Liang royal family, and there are countless people in their lineage who have Chinese names. The crowd did not dwell too much on this issue, and the wooden house soon returned to silence. In the corner, beside the 10th elder, a middle-aged woman frowned and said, "Tang Ning Ning, could it be him? You are confused, this is Candy, how could he be here?" Bai Jing glanced at Gong Sun Ying. "Besides, how could a man become a woman?" Gong Sun Ying shook her head and said, "I think I'm overthinking." The 10th elder on the side looked at Bai Jin and asked, "Senior sister, how sure are you about this matter?" Bai Jin said, "She has eye silkworm goo and silver snake king on her body. In terms of goo technique, no one is her opponent. She is surrounded by masters we arranged in, so it can be guaranteed to be foolproof." Outside the wooden house, several figures were guarding outside the valley. Their mission was to stop anyone except the saint and the guardian from entering the door. At a certain moment, one of them rubbed his eyes, looked at his companion beside him, and asked, "Did something pass by just now?" The person next to him glanced at him and said, "Where is the thing?" The man said, "I seem to see some shadow passing by just now, and the pile of dead leaves also moved." Another person waved his hand and said, "Is it the wind?" The man looked again and saw that the valley in front of him was empty and there was nothing. He shook his head and said, "Maybe." At this time, in the valley, the old beggar stepped on the thick dead leaves, curled his lips, and muttered, "What a useless place." Tang Ning squatted by the stream, washed his face, then reached out and caught a snake that jumped out of the water and tried to attack him. "Don't throw it away." The old beggar came over, took it from his hand, skillfully took out the snake gall and threw it into his mouth. He raised his head and took a sip of wine, looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What are you going to do next?" It was Tang Ning's first time for an older girl to get on the sedan chair to compete for the saint. He looked at Niju and asked, "Did the fourth elder tell you what to do next?" After a duo translated Tang Ning's words, Niju looked at him with a complicated expression and said a few words. A duo looked at Tang Ning and said, "She said that the fourth elder didn't say anything and just asked her to listen to Brother Tang." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Let's find a place to camp. If we don't go to them, they will come to us." The method of selecting saints in the 10,000 Gu sect has always been cruel, just like practicing Gu. 10 candidate saints enter the 10,000 Gu forest, and only one can become a saint in the end. The only way to become a saint is to defeat the other 9 candidates. Therefore, they don't actually need to do anything, and someone will naturally come to their door. After Tang Ning and others went some distance deep, they planned to camp on the spot and wait for the enemy. At the same time, there was a forest dozens of miles away from their camp. 11 figures were walking slowly in the forest. A girl looked behind her and said worriedly, "She won't catch up, right?" "Don't worry," another woman comforted, "with Sister Su here, we won't be afraid even if she catches up." The girl walked to the front, looked at a veiled woman in the front, and asked, "Sister Su, what should we do next?" The woman stopped, looked around, and said, "Just stop here, they will come to you sooner or later." Her voice is so melodious that one can't help but feel a tingling sensation in one's bones. Suddenly a breeze blew up in the forest, blowing up a corner of her veil, revealing half of her face that could enchant all living beings. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 863. Be honest. I still want to make a sneak attack. Don't move around. If you move again, the poison will bite you. In the 10,000 Gu forest, a duo tied up 11 people with ropes and made a ferocious expression on them. This kind of expression seemed a bit funny when she made it, but of course, the people she was threatening couldn't laugh in this situation. Tang Ning and others were the latest among the 10 to enter the 10,000 Gu forest, and the earliest one to enter here was half a month earlier than them. In the past half month, although it was not enough for them to fully understand the situation in the forest, they were much more familiar with it than Tang Ning and the others. Last night, it was the people of the third line who attacked them while they were resting. At this moment, the 10 saint guardians of the third line and their saint were all tied up and became their prisoners. This is enough to show that waiting for the rabbit is not a derogatory term under certain circumstances. It means waiting for work, which can save a lot of time and energy. The saint of the third line glanced at Niju and said, "If you want to take action, just give us a hard time. The fight for the saints is not a game. Someone dies every time. Even saints and guardians of one lineage are massacred by another lineage. It also happens from time to time." Before they entered 10,000 Gu forest, they had made some mental preparations. The saint of the third line took a deep breath, but Niju just glanced at her and turned around to leave. The saint of the third line looked at her back and said loudly, "You don't want me to surrender to you." Niju didn't care about this. He never looked at her again and left. If that incident had not happened, it would have been an exciting thing to capture everyone in the third line alive on the first night in the forest. However, the fact is that even if she defeats the other 9 veins and successfully becomes a saint, she is still a saint controlled by others. Everything depends on that person's mood. Niju glanced in that direction, feeling a little complicated. Her dream of being a saint had been shattered, and she couldn't think of any resistance or revenge. Even her grandmother had to listen to her, so how could she dare to disobey her? Tang Ning asked a duo to ask. After people from the third line entered the place, they met and clashed with people from the 5th and 6th lines. However, neither side could do anything to the other and did not fight to the end. With dozens of people hiding behind and watching eagerly, no one is willing to consume their own strength prematurely to take advantage of the enemy hiding in the dark. This is actually a game involving 10 forces. The decision of any party will affect the final result. If each lineage wants to win the final victory, there is only one way to go, and that is to eliminate as many opponents as possible without losing its own strength. It is the most undesirable and stupid behavior to fight with people from one lineage and lose both sides while letting the fishermen from the other lineage benefit. Tang Ning's strategy was to show weakness to the enemy and then sit back and wait for them to come to her. After all, everyone was hiding in the 10,000 Gu forest, waiting for others to reveal their flaws. In this case, she might as well show them her flaws. At the same time, in the forest dozens of miles away from here, the saint of the 5th lineage looked at a veiled woman and asked, "You won't kill me?" The woman rolled her eyes and said, "My husband-in-law doesn't like me killing people." The woman looked at her and said, "After we capture the other people and leave 10,000 Gu forest, we will let you go." In another valley not far away, the 6th meridian saint and more than a dozen guardians looked at the person opposite with wary expressions and asked, "Who are you?" The figure was wearing a bamboo hat, and from under the bamboo hat, an old voice came, "Submit, or die." Because the other party was wearing a bamboo hat, her face could not be seen clearly. The only information that could be obtained was that she was a woman. Because the voice was too elusive, it was impossible to guess her age. "Pretend to be a ghost," the 6th meridian saint snorted coldly, and 11 people quickly surrounded the figure. Although they didn't know the identity of this person, they felt the extreme danger from this person, and they attacked with all their strength without any reservation. However, when faced with the siege of 11 people, the figure did not dodge and faced them head-on. Bang bang bang. After several muffled sounds, several women's figures flew out and fell heavily to the ground. When they struggled to get up, bloodshot eyes were already flowing from the corners of their mouths. The saintess of the 6th meridian's face changed slightly, and she neighed. As the sound spread, a rustling sound was immediately made under the thick fallen leaves under everyone's feet, as if something was about to come out from underneath. As the fallen leaves trembled, centipedes, scorpions, and various poisonous insects emerged from them and surrounded the figure. The color of these poisonous insects is quite strange, not normal, and their size is much larger than the ordinary ones. They are obviously the poisonous insects that have been refined. The reason why the 10,000 Gu forest is called the 10,000 Gu forest is because the 10,000 Gu sect releases a large number of Gu worms here every year. These Gu worms continue to fight here, and the ones left behind are the most ferocious among them. When people from the 10 branches enter this place, the first thing they have to face is the poisonous insects that are everywhere here. But the saint of the 6th branch can actually control the poisons in the forest. If there are people from other branches here, they will be extremely surprised. When these Gu insects attacked from all directions, the figure still stood there and said in an indifferent voice, "Wogu really has some skills, and he actually figured out a way to control the Gu insects in Wangu forest." Wugu was the elder of the 6th meridian. When the saint of the 6th meridian saw this man calling the 6th elder by his first name without any respect, her face changed slightly and she asked, "Who are you?" The figure did not answer, but the Gu insects crawling towards her seemed to sense something terrifying on her body. They stopped one after another, not daring to come any closer, and soon burrowed under the dead leaves again. The 6th meridian saint's heart tightened, and before she had time to take precautions, someone had already grabbed her by the neck. The figure looked at her and repeated, "Submit, or die." The saintess of the 6th meridian turned red, and after a long while, she spoke with difficulty, I am willing to surrender." Facts have proved that the method of waiting for rabbits is not only effective, but also more than once. As long as the trap is set, one silly rabbit will crash into it one after another. After setting up an ambush to catch all the saints and guardians of the 3rd line, only one day later, the people of the 2nd line took the bait. They also wanted to sneak attack Tang Ning and others while they were resting at night, in order to end the battle as quickly as possible and at the lowest cost. Of course, the result was that all of them suffered the same fate as Third Pulse, being tied into rice dumplings by Tang Ning. With the experience of the first 2 times, Tang Ning stayed here with more peace of mind. The old beggar was addicted to catching bugs in the past 2 days. He stuffed the roasted ones into his mouth if he knew or didn't know them. Tang Ning didn't have such a strong taste. He hunted bugs in the mountains. He bought some game and cooked it briefly. After keeping enough food for himself, he asked a duo to share the rest with the captives. What surprised him was that for the next 3 days, no rabbits bumped into the tree stump he had buried, and they didn't even see a single person. More than 10 miles away from here, the veiled woman and the 10 guardians were blocked by a figure. The man looked at them and said in an indifferent tone, "Submit, or die." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 864. Holy girl, let's stop her, you go first. More than 10 guardians surrounded the figure. One of the leaders looked back at the veiled woman and said anxiously. When they met the saint of the 8th meridian just now, this person appeared silently. It only took her a few breaths of effort to capture everyone, including the 8th meridian saint and her guardian. A few days ago, they also witnessed her annihilating the 7th meridian army. They didn't know who this person was or whether he was a master, but they knew that they were no match for her. The veiled woman walked up to them and said, "You are no match for her. I will stop her, so you go." The mission of the guardian is to protect the safety of the saint. When the saint is in danger, he will rush in front of her, and he will not hesitate to sacrifice his own life when necessary. The tall slender woman at the head looked at her and said decisively, "Holy girl, this is absolutely impossible. You should leave quickly." The veiled woman said no more and looked at the figure under the cloak opposite. The tall woman knew that the saint's decision would not change, and there was a hint of emotion in her eyes, and then she said decisively, "Let's go, don't involve the saint." "You are kind and righteous," a voice came from under the cloak. The voice was erratic. I could only tell that it was a woman under the cloak, but I couldn't guess her approximate age. Ninth Elder, stop pretending. The veiled woman looked at her and said, "If you ignore the canon rules, send you into the goo forest, and intervene in the fight for the saint, you won't be afraid of being deprived of your position as an elder and thrown into the goo pond. No bones left." The figure under the cloak was silent for a long time before speaking again. This time, the voice under the cloak was no longer erratic, and the voice of an old woman really came. She looked at the woman and asked, "How did you know?" The woman glanced at her and said, "The 10 elders each have their own strengths in the art of poisoning. Which elder's ability to exorcise poisons can be as good as that of the 9th elder?" The figure took off his cloak and threw it on the ground, revealing the face of an old woman. The 9th elder looked at the veiled woman and said calmly, "I originally wanted to spare your life, but now it seems I can't." As soon as she finished speaking, countless goo insects suddenly surged out from under her feet and surged towards the veiled woman. The woman stretched out her hand, holding a glistening eye silkworm in her palm. Those goo insects crawled half a foot away from her, but they were trembling and did not dare to come forward. However, almost in the next moment, a green light shot out from the old woman's sleeve. I don't know what the green light was. The eye silkworm in the woman's hand felt the breath, and immediately shot out from the woman's hand, and that green light shot out from the woman's hand. The green light fights together. At the same time, the goo insects on the ground started to move again. They crawled past the woman's feet and then disappeared under the dead leaves on the ground. The 9th elder's expression finally changed. He looked at her and asked, "How did you do that?" Under the veil of the woman, she smiled, looked at her, and asked, "The 9th elder is one of the oldest elders in the religion. Don't you know how I did it?" "This is impossible." The 9th elder's expression changed again, and he said sternly, "The previous generation of saints fell, and the 10,000 poison sutras were robbed. It is impossible for anyone to know this technique. Who are you?" The woman took a step forward and said, "You might as well take a guess." The 9th elder glanced at her and said, "You don't have to think about delaying time. When I kill you, it will be their turn." The veiled woman shook her head and said, "This is not the reason for me to delay." The 9th elder naturally didn't believe it. He snorted coldly and was about to take action when his expression suddenly changed. He took a few steps back and said in shock, "Who are you?" The veiled woman looked at her, sighed, and said, "What a pity." The old woman kept a distance of 2 feet from her, and she felt more at ease. This saint of the 10th lineage is really weird. Not only does she know the secret skills that only the previous generations of saints know, but she can also poison her body silently, almost without even her noticing. Such a person is no longer as good as the current one. How much weaker are the top 10 elders? In fact, when it comes to poison, even she is not as good as her. This can be seen from the strength she has shown so far. There is no doubt that she must be hiding a big secret. This secret is most likely related to the previous generation of saints and the lost 10,000 poison sutras. In a short period of time, the 9th elder regarded her as an opponent of the same level as her, and became extremely vigilant. The veiled woman also felt the pressure coming from the opposite side. After all, the other side was an extremely senior elder. In addition to goo magic, he also had extremely high martial arts skills. Just when she was thinking about this, the old woman had already moved. "Want a bunch?" Tang Ning looked at the grilled centipedes handed over by the old beggar, rejected his kindness, and picked up the rabbit leg he had left yesterday. Perhaps because this was a 10,000 poison forest with countless poisonous insects, even in the mountain forest, Tang Ning could find very little game. Moreover, since the second and third veins fell into his hands, the people from the other veins seemed to have evaporated out of thin air, and Tang Ning had not seen even one of them. The fight for the saint was turned into a wild survival game by the Wangu cult, and no food was allowed to be brought in from outside. The old beggar didn't care. In his eyes, anyone who could run could eat. But if this continued, Tang Ning and others would have trouble eating. He now understood the farmer's idea in the story of waiting for the rabbit by the tree. If they sat here, people from other branches would come one by one for them to catch, and that would save a lot of trouble. Rustle. Tang Ning's idea had just emerged in his mind when a rustling sound suddenly came from the woods nearby. From the sound, at least 10 people were approaching this side. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw that there were exactly 10 women running out of the woods. Tang Ning showed a trace of surprise on his face. Judging from their clothes, these 10 people should be the guardians of a saint of a certain branch. However, the mission of the saint's guardian is to protect the saint. How could there be only the guardian and not the saint? Tang Ning's face was full of surprise, and the faces of the 10 women who ran out of the forest were full of fear. They had never thought that there were so many people outside the forest. While they were stunned, a duo and others had already taken action. Before the old beggar could make a move, everyone had already captured these people. In the past few days, the saints of the second and third veins and their guardians have surrendered to them under Tang Ning's earnest persuasion. After all, they have no chance to compete for the saint, and standing on the side of the future saint is obviously more promising than fighting to the end. A duo walked to the side of the leading woman and asked, "Which vein are you from? Where is your saint?" The leading woman turned her head away and said nothing. A duo put her hands on her hips and said, "Speak, or not, if you don't, I'll throw you into the poisonous insect pile." The 2 younger girls among the 10 people trembled and turned pale when they heard this. The leading girl turned her head and gritted her teeth and said, "The 10th pulse." Tang Ning, who was sitting on a tree stump not far away, stood up suddenly when he heard this. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 865. When he heard this woman say that they were from the 10th lineage, a duo's face lit up with joy, because the purpose of their trip was to find the saint of the 10th lineage. Tang Ning strode over, looked at the woman, and asked, "Where is your saint?" The woman glanced at him and said in Chinese, "Don't let us betray the saint." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Untie them." After hearing this, a duo immediately asked people to untie the ropes on these people. This person of unknown origin had just captured them and simply let them go. The woman's face showed a vigilant look and she looked at them warily. The behavior of this lineage was somewhat unexpected, and at the critical moment of the fight for the saint, there was a Han man in the forbidden area of Wangu Forest. These doubts lingered in her heart and she could not get rid of it. Tang Ning looked at her and said, "I have no ill intentions. Your saint is my friend." The woman glanced at him with an indifferent look and said, "Do you think I will believe it?" "Okay." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Actually, she is my wife. I came here just to find her." The woman looked at him with wide eyes, gritted her teeth and said, "Shameless." It seemed that she was loyal to Sume. Tang Ning was not angry. She changed her question and said, "Your duty is to protect the saint. Why are you the only ones here?" The woman turned her head away and stopped answering. Although the more secretive she is, the more loyal she is to Sume, but what Tang Ning needs to know at this moment is the news about Sume. "I'm warning you, you'd better cooperate." Tang Ning pointed at the old beggar beside him and said, "He can do anything." The woman looked at him calmly and said, "If you want to kill or behead him, it's up to you." At this moment, there was nothing more important in his heart than Sume's safety. Tang Ning glanced at the 10 women and said, "I heard that the Wangu sect has a kind of gu torture. Which one of you wants to try it?" Upon hearing Tang Ning's words, the expressions of the 10 people changed drastically. Gu punishment is a unique punishment method of Wangu section compared with gu punishment. Chenguo's punishment is child's play. Gu torture involves fixing a person's limbs on a wooden board, placing them into a huge pit, and then putting various kinds of poisonous insects into the pit. These poisonous insects are not very toxic. After being poisoned, they will not die immediately, but they can also, because of this, those who bear this punishment will suffer all kinds of inhuman torture before death, and in the end only the bones will be eaten by the poisonous insects. This kind of punishment is too cruel. Even in Wangu sect, it will not be used easily if it is not a major crime of apostasy. After a younger woman heard about the Gu torture, her face turned pale and her body trembled. She couldn't help but burst into tears. She pointed her hand in the direction where they came from and said loudly, "Where is the saint? Don't do anything to me, use Gu punishment." The leading woman's eyes were about to burst, and she said with grief and anger, "Xiao Yu. Okay, don't cry." Tang Ning looked at her and comforted, "Wait a while, you will know if what I said is true." He told a duo to keep an eye on them, took the old beggar and ran in the direction they came from. Somewhere in Wangu forest, the veil on Su Mei's face had fallen off, her chest was rising and falling slightly, and she looked at the old woman opposite, her pretty face slightly pale. Even though she has learned the 10,000 Poison Sutra and is proficient in various poisonous techniques, the old woman opposite is also a master of Gudeo who has been immersed in Gudeo for decades. To defeat her through Gu techniques is beyond her ability at present. 2 things. As for the martial arts, the ninth elder also had decades more experience than her. She had been fighting with him for so long, even though she had used all her trump cards, she had not taken any advantage at all. At this moment, she naturally didn't know that although the face of the old woman opposite was calm, there was already a storm in her heart. After a brief exchange, she was able to tell that this beautiful and outrageous woman had surpassed them elders in the art of voodoo. It was just because she was too young and lacked experience. Not only that, her martial arts skills are also extraordinary. She was able to remain undefeated for such a long time even though she only used 70% to 80% of her strength to find out where her master came from. From this point of view, as long as she is given 10 years, no, as long as she is given 5 years, he will not be her opponent. If she hadn't been secretly sent into the 10,000 Gu forest, there would have been no suspense in this battle for the saint. At this moment, she had found out the details of this woman, and her martial arts moves indeed came from the 10th meridian. Among the 10 branches of the 10,000 Gu sect, each branch has its own specialties. The Gu skills of the 10th branch are not as good as those of the other branches, but their martial arts have always been the first among the 10 branches, and the other branches are far behind. Decades ago, when the previous generation of saints had not yet fallen, the 10th lineage senior sisters were able to overpower the saints with their martial arts skills alone. Although they have become more low-key in recent years, no one in the lineage dares to underestimate them. Now that he had found out her origin, the ninth elder showed no mercy and took action with all his strength the next moment. Su Mei's pressure doubled in an instant, and she soon fell into a disadvantage. She was accidentally slapped on the shoulder by the old woman, and her face showed an abnormal blush, and she continued to fall back. At a certain moment, a hand was placed on her waist, stopping her retreat. She immediately turned her head, and when she saw the face that had haunted her countless times over the past year, her body trembled, and a layer of mist appeared in her eyes. Tang Ning looked at her pale face and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" Su Mei shook her head slightly and said, "It's okay." Tang Ning looked up at the old woman and angrily said, "Old thing, you dare to hit my wife." Seeing Tang Ning rushing towards the old woman, Su Mei followed without any hesitation. Her strength was only slightly weaker than that of the ninth elder. With Tang Ning's joining, the pressure on her was instantly reduced, and she immediately turned from defense to offense. Compared to Su Mei, the old woman was very uncomfortable at this moment. If it was just the woman, she could handle it, but she would also need to put in a lot of energy. At this moment, this young man who came out of nowhere, After joining forces with the woman, she was a little difficult to deal with. The strength of this young man was also good. Although it was far worse than that of the woman of the 10th meridian, it just made up for the not so big difference in strength between the two of them. The woman attacked, and he assisted her. Every move hit her weak spot, forcing her to distract herself. But the woman was not a pushover. The two of them worked very well together. Once she was distracted, she was overwhelmed and began to lose ground. After realizing that she could not defeat the two of them, she decided to retreat. She exchanged a palm strike with the woman, and with the help of the force of the palm strike, her body flew backwards. After landing, she came to the old man who came with the young man and stood on the sidelines to watch the fun. She stretched out her hand and grabbed his neck. A trace of murderous intent appeared in her eyes. She said coldly, "Don't come over, or I will kill him." "Whatever you want." Tang Ning glanced at her and ignored her. He took a deep breath, took Sumei into his arms, and said, "I finally found you." Sumei was also very emotional, hugged him tightly, and whispered, "Husband." The old beggar sighed and murmured, "So many years have passed, why are you still so bad-tempered?" The little girl in the red belly band. The old woman's body shook violently when she heard it, as if she thought of something, and her eyes suddenly looked at the old beggar. The next moment, her body trembled, and she loosened her hand that was pinching his neck as if she had been electrocuted. She stepped back a few steps, her body trembling, her face pale, and trembling. You. The old beggar had captured the old woman and tied her up. Tang Ning slowly let go of Sumei, lowered his head, and said apologetically, "It's all my fault. I made you suffer here. It's not bitter. As long as it's for our future, it's not bitter at all." Sumei smiled and said. When she looked at Tang Ning again, she finally realized something. She looked at him and asked, "Why are you dressed like this?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 866. Tang Ning didn't have the ghostly speed of the old beggar, so she could sneak in here silently under the noses of the elders. If he wanted to enter the forbidden area of 10,000 Gu Forest, he could only dress up as a woman and pretend to be a guardian. This feeling was very uncomfortable. After entering the forest, he washed his face and changed his hairstyle, but there was nowhere to change his clothes. Sumei looked at him in surprise. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Clothes don't matter. Let's go. Let's go out first." No. Sumei shook her head and said, "If you go out now, wouldn't you give up the fight for the saint?" "It doesn't matter." Tang Ning smiled and explained, "We will go to the grassland and resettle there. You don't have to fight for the saint anymore." Sumei looked at him and said suspiciously, "Grassland?" Tang Ning hadn't told her about Wanyanyan yet, and now was not the time. Tang Ning changed the subject and said, "We can talk about this after we go out." Sumei looked at him with a half smile but said, "Tell me now." Tang Ning gave her a helpless look and told her what happened on the grassland without hiding anything about Wanyanyan. The next moment, he covered his ears and begged for mercy, "It hurts, be gentle, be gentle." Sumei pinched his ears with her beautiful hands and said, "I won't let you remember this time. I don't know how many more sisters will appear next time." Tang Ning patted her chest and promised that she wouldn't have another sister next time, and then Sumei let go of his ears. However, she still shook her head and said, "We have come this far. It would be a pity to give up now. If we can become a saint and control the 10,000 Gu sect, we will have greater confidence in the future." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I heard from the fourth elder that if you become a saint, you have to stay here. This is the rule of Wangu section. It's okay if we don't become such a saint." Sumei smiled and said, "Rules are always set by people. When I become a saint, it will not be too late for us to change this rule." Tang Ning thought for a while, if they could control Gizhu, then the grassland would not be their only escape route. They were only one step away from this step anyway, so it would be a pity to give up like this. He looked at Sumei, nodded and said, "I'll listen to you." After entering the 10,000 gu forest, Tangning and Sumei each captured a few of the 10 meridians. The rest were all captured by the 9th elder and submitted to the 9th meridian. In this way, she only needs to defeat 9th meridian again. Tangning walked over, looked at the old woman, and asked, "Where are you people from the 9th line?" "Outside the 10,000 gu forest." The competition for saints has always lasted for at least half a month and as long as a month. During this period, most of the elders of the 10 meridians chose to wait outside. At this time, it had been 5 days since the last 9th vein entered the forest, but the first vein that entered the forest had been in the forest for more than half a month. According to the past situation, in the 10,000 gu forest at this time, the fight has reached a very intense stage. At most half a month, the winner of this saintly battle can be decided. While the elders of Shimei and the elders of the sect were waiting outside the forest, there was sudden movement at the entrance of 10,000 gu forest. Many elders were heartened and walked out of the wooden house one after another, looking towards the entrance. More than 10 figures slowly walked out of the forest. The elder of the 7th meridian was delighted when he saw this, because the first person to walk out of the forest was the person from the 7th meridian. On the contrary, the expressions of the other elders darkened. However, their expressions soon changed again. Although the saints and guardians of the 7th lineage were the first to come out of the 10,000 gu forest, their bodies were tied with ropes and vines. Not only the 7th lineage, but also the people from all lines who came out immediately behind them also had these things tied to their bodies. The people of 9th meridian saw expressions of extreme disbelief on their faces when they saw the 9th meridian saint and the guardian walking out and caught a glimpse of the ropes on their bodies. Baijin and Gong Sunying looked at Sumei, who was walking at the back, with a smile on their faces. The elders of the other lines looked at them and said with complicated expressions, "The 10th line. All the other meridians have been tied up, except for the 10th meridians." What this means is naturally self-evident. After leaving the 10,000 gu forest, someone would naturally help them loosen their bonds. After the 7th channel saint girl untied the rope, she immediately walked to her elder and whispered a few words in his ear. When the elder of the 7th lineage heard this, his expression changed drastically. He looked at the people of the 9th lineage and asked sternly, "Where is the 9th elder?" The faces of the people in the 9th meridian changed. One of them looked at the 7th elder and said bravely, "The 9th elder is in retreat." "Fart," the 7th elder said angrily, "what a 9th meridian, as one of the 10 elders, he dares to sneak into the 10,000 gu forest and interfere in the affairs of the saint." The faces of the people in the 9th line changed. According to their plan, the 9th elder sneaked into the 10,000 gu forest this time, and first used force to coerce the people of the various lines to submit. When the 9th line took control of the situation, they would then kill the people in the other lines. Death has no evidence. At that time, only the people of their 9th lineage will come out of the 10,000 gu forest alive. Who knows that the 9th elder secretly sneaked into the 10,000 gu forest to help the 9th lineage? But what they didn't expect was that the 9th elder came into the forest to assist. This was supposed to be a foolproof thing, but how could the 10th meridian have the last laugh? Of course, no matter how shocked they were, they could never admit it at this moment. However, the 1st, 7th and 8th veins were all caught by the 9th elder. Now they stood up to testify and pointed the finger at the 9th vein, causing those people to sweat profusely. The great elder was a silver-haired old woman with the calmest expression. She looked at the 3 saints and asked, "Did you see the 9th elder with your own eyes?" The 7th vein saint shook her head and said, "She was wearing a cloak, and we didn't see her face." The great elder looked at her and asked, "Then how did you know she was the 9th elder?" Sumei handed a jade token to the great elder and said, "I fought with her, and this fell from her." The great elder took the jade token and after checking it, confirmed that it was undoubtedly the identity token of the ninth elder. A hint of strangeness appeared on her face. The person who could fight with the ninth elder, escape unscathed, and take away her identity jade token, at least had the strength of the 10 great elders. No wonder the 10th vein can sweep all the veins. This woman is so young, but she has the strength of the 10 elders. How can the candidates for the saints of the veins be her opponents? The elder looked at Sumei and asked, "Where is the ninth elder?" Sumei said, "He ran away." In fact, the old beggar and Tang Ning took the ninth elder away. She had seen the old beggar and knew her and Tang Ning's identities. Bringing her out would cause some unnecessary trouble. The faces of the elders around him changed slightly when they heard this. Most of them were not opponents of the ninth elder who could make the ninth elder run away after fighting. No one expected that there would be so many variables in the restart of the competition for the saint. The ninth elder did not hesitate to break the rules and personally go down in order for the ninth vein to win the position of the saint, so he must be punished. In addition, among the 10 guardians of the fourth vein, there was actually a man, and several people immediately pointed the finger at the fourth elder. Everyone. The eighth elder stepped forward, looked at them, and said, "Although the fourth vein was wrong, it was only a minor mistake. The most important thing right now is to confirm whether the ninth elder is in the ninth vein." He didn't want to speak for the fourth vein, but his life was in the hands of others, so he could only shift the topic away from Tang Ning. The great elder glanced at the fourth elder, but also agreed with the eighth elder's words, and said, "Go to the ninth vein." /text/83063/ You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 867. Canon rules stipulate that the guardian of the saint must also be a woman. Fourth lineage has violated canon rules by inserting a man into it without authorization. But as the eighth elder said, the matter of the fourth lineage is a trivial matter. After all, when they came out of the forest, they were tied into rice dumplings, and it did not involve the ownership of the status of the saint. Things are different with the ninth elder. As one of the 10 elders, she actually sneaked into the 10,000 Gu forest and interfered in such a major event as the selection of a saint. According to the canon rules, she would be deposed as an elder and be tortured to death. When everyone came to the village where the ninth meridian was located, they did not find the ninth elder who was in retreat. Combined with the testimonies of the candidate saints, what happened in the 10,000 Gu forest was completely determined to be the ninth elder's apostasy. As for the minor violation of religious rules in the fourth channel, no one cares about it anymore. What they care about is another big thing. After the ninth elder intervened in this matter, the first, seventh, and eighth lines were all wiped out by her alone, and this battle for the Holy Maiden lost its fairness. These meridians therefore requested that the competition be repeated. The 10th meridians had already won the competition, so they naturally disagreed. Because of this matter, they had endless disputes with the other meridians. Since this competition is inherently unfair, the result is naturally unfair and cannot be counted. Although the ninth elder violated the canon rules, our saint maiden has defeated her. Why is the result not counted? It's empty talk. Who knows if you picked up that token? The ownership of the position of the saint will determine the prosperity of all the lineages in the future. No matter which lineage wants the position of the saint to fall into their own family, they will fight hard on this matter and no one will let it go. Stop arguing. The great elder's words made everyone quiet down. Although the great elder is not the eldest among the people, the power of the first lineage is the most powerful among all the lines. The strength of the great elder is slightly higher than that of the elders of the various lines, and he is the most prestigious in the religion. She glanced at everyone and said, "Since Sumai is not convinced, let them compete again." Just as the 10th elder was about to speak, the first elder glanced at her and asked, "If what you said is true, even the 9th elder would run away when encountering the saint chosen by your lineage, so why not compete again?" After hearing this, the 10th elder thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Listen to the great elder. She knows the abilities of senior nephew Su better than anyone else. Her attainments in the Gu art have reached an incredible level. Let alone the saint candidate selected by the various veins, even the 10 elders present here cannot even think of beating her in the Gu art. Of course, it would be impossible for her to defeat the 10 elders using Gu. The result of this is that when the 10 elders meet her, they can only give up their good voodoo skills and resort to fighting close to each other. During this period, they have to be careful whether she will release voodoo or poison. The candidate saint selected by Jemai is not an opponent of the same level as her at all. After the great elder finished speaking, he looked at the 4th elder and an elder from the 9th meridian and said, "The 4th meridian and the 9th meridian violated the canon rules and are not allowed to participate in this competition. Do you have any objections?" The 4th elder had long given up on competing for the saint. When Tang Ning showed up, she gave up on this unrealistic idea, and naturally she had no objections at the moment. Although 9th meridian was unwilling to do so, they had made a big mistake this time. They did not dare to provoke the public's anger again, so they could only nod in agreement. As a result, the original 10 candidates for sainthood were reduced to 8, but the elders of the various veins were even more unsure than before. If what 10th meridian said was not a lie, even the 9th elders would have no choice but to run away when they met their candidate saint. Even if they competed 10 more times, the outcome would not change in any way. This time the competition was held 3 days later. Each lineage had no time to return to their tribe, so they settled in a nearby village. The ancient spiritual department is not far from here, which is why the 4th elder sent Niju to 10,000 Gu forest at the last moment. The one that is closer to here is the first line. Among the various lines, the people from the other lines have all gone to the first line. The 8th line and the 10th line have followed the 4 elders back to the ancient spiritual department. After everyone left, an elder from the 9th meridian immediately darkened his face, looked at the candidate saint of the 9th meridian, and asked in a deep voice, "What's going on, where is the elder?" The woman shook her head and said, "At that time, the elder went to chase the people of the 10th meridian, and never came back again." The elder continued to ask, "How did you fall into their hands?" There was a trace of fear deep in the woman's eyes, and she said, "The veiled woman is good at using poison, and all of us were poisoned by her silently." Poison. The elder's face darkened and he said, "Isn't the 10th meridian good at martial arts? When did you start using poison?" To allow the 11 people they carefully selected from the clan to be poisoned silently requires extremely high poison skills. As far as he knew, only the 3rd elder Ingas who had such poison skills. No matter what, he couldn't believe that a junior from the 10th lineage had the ability to rival the 9th elder. Unable to figure out the key to this, he could only lower his face and said solemnly, "Send people to the vicinity of Wangu Forest to find the 9th elder." Just as the people of the 9th line were carefully avoiding the sight of the other lines and looking for the mysteriously missing 9th elder, the ancient spiritual department and the 4th elder looked at the 9th elder whose skills were crippled and imprisoned in a dark room, and felt threatened because of the threat. The trace of dissatisfaction and resentment that arose instantly dissipated without a trace. Compared with the 9th elder, she didn't know how lucky she was. "It's really you." In another stilted building, Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying looked at a figure that appeared in front of them and exclaimed at the same time. Tang Ning waved to the two of them casually and said, "Long time no see." Wherever Tang Ning appears, there will definitely be a bloody storm. Bai Jin looked at him and asked warily, "What are you doing here?" Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, "Does this have anything to do with you?" Speaking of which, he was also full of resentment towards Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying. He had promised him that he would not let Su Mei be in danger. What was the result? If he hadn't arrived in time, Su Mei would have been no match for the old witch. Tang Ning could not imagine the consequences of that situation. He glanced at Bai Jin and Gong Sunying and said, "It's getting late. You should go back. If you have anything to do, we'll talk about it tomorrow." Bai Jin and Gong Sunying looked at the sky outside the window. The sun was hanging high in the sky at the moment. It was exactly noon, and there were still several hours before the sun set. How could it look like it was getting late? Just as Bai Jin was about to speak, Gong Sunying tugged on her sleeve and said, "It's getting late. Let's go. We'll talk about other things tomorrow." Gong Sunying and Bai Jin walked out. Tang Ning closed the door, turned to look at Su Mei, and asked, "Did you miss me?" "Think? What are you thinking about?" "I want to go anywhere." One day later. A little separation is better than a new marriage, and Su Mei has been apart for more than a year. Naturally, she has a lot to say and a lot to do. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the two of them got up. After washing, they walked out of the room hand in hand. A duo came over from a distance, his eyes stayed on Su Mei's face for a long time, his face turned slightly red, and he said, "Sister-in-law Tang is so beautiful." Tang Ning left with the old beggar at that time and did not formally introduce A duo to Su Mei. Hearing this, she said, "This is A duo, a friend I met here. He helped me a lot this time." Su Mei looked at her, smiled slightly, and said, "Sister A duo is also very beautiful." Being praised by Su Mei for being beautiful, A duo's face turned even redder. After saying a few more pleasantries, he left with a blushing face. After she left, Su Mei looked at Tang Ning with a half smile, and asked, "Are they really just friends?" The husband and wife are of the same mind, so how could he not know the meaning of Su Mei's words? Tang Ning glanced at her angrily and said, "Where did you think you were? She is still a little girl. Do I look like this kind of person?" A girl from the Wuxia tribe who was selected as a guardian along with A duo walked past Tang Ning, greeted him, stopped again, and asked in Chinese, "Little doctor, when are you and A duo going to be together? We're getting married, and I'm going to have a drink then." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 868. The Young Master of Ruyi. Chapter 863. Making a plan. Watching the girl leave, Tang Ning's face darkened. Why would a girl drink wine? Doesn't she have wine at home? He turned to look at Su Mei and said, "I can explain this." Su Mei smiled at him and said, "You'd better explain everything that needs to be explained." She was extremely beautiful, and her smile was even more beautiful, but Tang Ning felt a chill on his back when he saw this smile. Of course, the matter with the duo could be explained. This was originally a temporary measure that Tang Ning had to take in order to find her. Tang Ning had a clear conscience. But other things were different. Confess and be lenient. Rather than being discovered by her later, it would be better for him to take the initiative to confess now. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "A lot of things happened during your absence." Su Mei looked at him and asked, "For example?" "For example?" Tang Ning sighed and said, "One day, my mother told me that I actually had a fiancé who was arranged to be married to me since birth." Su Mei crossed her arms and asked, "Then did you get married?" "No." Tang Ning shook his head and said, "This happened more than 20 years ago. I was not born at that time, and her identity was a little special." Su Mei was not angry at all when she heard this, but asked with interest, "What's so special?" Tang Ning said, "My fiancé is actually cousin Tang Shui." Su Mei nodded, indicating that she already knew, and then asked, "Anything else?" "One more thing." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "After we return to Beijing, if you hear some rumors about me and Princess Anyang, don't believe it. This is actually a beautiful misunderstanding. The matter with Tang Shui is easy to solve. This is not something Tang Ning can decide at all. Because he handed over the Tang family's property in the capital to Princess Anyang, some rumors may not disappear when he returns. He still needs to take precautions in advance. After explaining these two things, Tang Ning felt much more at ease. If he didn't say it now, he would be ravaged when she found out. Princess Anyang. Su Mei heard this, thought for a moment, and said, Princess Anyang is not impossible, she looks fertile. Stop. Seeing Su Mei's words getting more and more outrageous, Tang Ning immediately changed the subject when he saw Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying walking towards him, saying, Your master is here. Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying were here for the competition 2 days later. Because of the intervention of the ninth elder, the other sects were very dissatisfied with the result of the dispute in the Wangu forest. In response to this, the great elder proposed another competition. The fourth and ninth sects violated the rules of the sect and were disqualified from the competition. In other words, there were only 7 sects competing with them. This competition was not as complicated as the one in the Wangu forest. Each sect did not need to send out a guardian. It was a pure competition between the candidates for the saint. The format of the competition still continued the tradition of the Wangu sect. The 8 candidates for the saint fought on the same stage, and the one who could stand on the stage in the end was the new saint. Gu magic is the foundation of the Wangu section. All competitions in the Wangu sect are the same as refining Gu. This is actually very disadvantageous to Su Mei. If it is a one-on-one competition, Su Mei can easily defeat all opponents, but if the 7 veins join forces, she will become very passive. Bai Jin didn't care about this. He looked at her and said, with your strength, as long as you are careful, it doesn't matter if they join forces. Tang Ning glanced at Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying and said, what tricks do you have in your back box? Take them out quickly. Don't hide them at this time. Bai Jin looked at him and shook his head and said, we have taught her everything we know. Even if she faces the 10 elders, she will not be much weaker. Even if the candidates for the 10 vain saints join hands, they are not her opponents. In this year, Su Mei has made great progress, and Tang Ning can feel it. After all, Tang Ning has made great progress during the time she was away, but he can deeply feel that the gap between him and Su Mei is bigger than before. The candidates for the saints nominated by the 10 clans are all the best in the clan. Tang Ning estimated that his strength should be no problem to deal with 2 candidates for the saints, and he might not be a match for Su Mei with 5 candidates. In other words, there should be no suspense in the competition in 2 days. Even so, Tang Ning still pestered the old beggar and taught her a few secret techniques. The old guy's martial arts were acquired from one mountain gate after another, and he had the strengths of hundreds of schools. Others had 1 or 2 secret techniques at the bottom of the box, but he had a whole box. 30 miles away from here, the first clan of the Wangu sect and the elders of the other 7 clans gathered here. Although the competition for the saint of Wangu forest was not counted because the 9th elder broke the rules, and the competition would be recontested in 2 days, there was still a thorny problem facing all of them. Does that woman really have the strength to fight against the 9th elder? Doesn't that mean she is already qualified to become one of the 10 elders? Whether she defeated the 9th elder or not, it is an indisputable fact that the people selected by the various sects are far inferior to her. After some analysis and discussion, they came to a conclusion that they were unwilling to believe. In the competition 2 days later, their chances of winning were really pitiful. The 10th line woman was like a mountain standing in front of everyone. They could not cross it and could only look up. Unless they take action personally, other veins can only win if they exclude her from everyone else. However, they are the top 10 elders, and there is no possibility of them doing it themselves, unless they want to be eaten by thousands of poisons and die. An elder looked at them and said, I have a proposal. Remove the 10th vein first. All the veins join forces to eliminate the 10th vein first. Several elders looked at each other, with strange lights flashing in their eyes. If they don't eliminate the woman from the 10th meridian first, they will have no hope. If this enemy is eliminated first, then who will take the position of the saint will depend on their own abilities. An elder said, "This person is good at using poison, telling people of all walks of life to be careful, and covering his face with a veil." There are many mountains and forests in Guizhou, and there are many smoky miasma in the forest. When the Gu mountain people encounter the smoky miasma, they often cover their faces with a special gauze to cover their mouth and nose, which can keep the smoky miasma poison out of their bodies. For opponents who are proficient in poison techniques, it is natural for the 10 elders to be prepared for close combat. However, these candidate saints must take certain protective measures, otherwise they will lose the ability to fight back due to poisoning before they get close. Force. It is said that she has eye silkworm voodoo on her body, and she also knows a way to expel the voodoo. Don't try to defeat her through voodoo. A look of surprise appeared on the face of an elder, and he murmured, "When did the 10th meridian produce such a talent? If we give this woman another 2 years, even we will not be her opponents." So, only 7 people joined forces to fight her at close range. Don't forget, what the 10th meridian is best at is martial arts. Whatever means you have, leave it to them. If it's too late, it will be too late. Several elders unanimously made a plan to get rid of the powerful enemy of the 10th lineage first. Then, they each returned to their respective residences to give final instructions to the candidate saints of each lineage. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Luan mobile version website. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 869. The competition was held in the first vein. Tang Ning and Su Mei arrived an hour before the competition and were placed in a stilled house. The old beggar was a cancer in the eyes of the Wangu sect members. He was like a rat crossing the street, and everyone wanted to kill him. However, there were only 3 people in the Wangu sect who knew him. The 4th elder and the 8th elder were controlled, so they dared not say much. The 9th elder had his martial arts abolished and was imprisoned in the 4th vein, so he could appear here in a swagger. The 8th vein was far away from the 10th vein. As soon as the 8th elder entered the small building, someone walked in from outside. After the 8th elder sat down, he glanced at him and asked, "What does the 7th elder want to see me for?" The 7th elder looked at the people in the room and said, "You go out first." Everyone looked at the 8th elder, who nodded and said, "You go out first." After everyone left, the 7th elder sat opposite the 8th elder and said, "I am looking for the 8th elder this time on behalf of the elders of the other veins to discuss an important matter with you." The 7th veins joined forces to eliminate the 10th vein first. This was the decision made by the 6 veins. The 8th elder was not with them at the time, so when the 8th elder arrived here, the 7th elder approached him on behalf of everyone. The 8th elder looked at him and asked, "What's the matter?" The 7th elder looked at him and said, "You also know that the woman of the 10th vein has the strength of the 10 elders. Unless we join forces, no one can stop her from becoming a saint." The 8th elder said, "The competition for the saint depends on each person's ability. If several veins join forces to deal with her, wouldn't it be a disgrace to all of us?" The 7th elder didn't expect him to refuse. He frowned and said, "You know that the 10th vein has a close relationship with the former royal family. Over the years, they have been running around to restore the country. If the 10th vein takes the saint, won't it involve our entire clan? Kiandi used to be the territory of Liang State, but it was only in name. Liang State actually controlled Diandi. The Gu tribe rested and recuperated in Kiandi and was not under the jurisdiction of Liang State at that time. They didn't have much sense of belonging to Liang State. Even if Liang State was destroyed, they didn't have too deep feelings. However, the 10th clan has always been loyal to the Liang Kingdom's royal family. In the past 10 years, it has always wanted to restore the country. If the position of the saint falls to the 10th clan, then the entire Gu clan will definitely be drawn into this vortex. This is one of the most important reasons why all the clans joined forces to resist the 10th clan. Although the Gu clan wants to select a capable saint to revive the Wangu sect, it does not want to get involved in the restoration of the Liang kingdom. Therefore, the position of the saint can fall into the hands of any clan, but not the 10th clan. The order of the saint cannot be disobeyed. Once the position of the saint is taken by the 10th clan, they can only obey the decision made by the saint. If it was a month ago, the 8th elder would naturally agree to this proposal, but now his life is still in the hands of others. How dare he openly oppose that person? The 8th elder shook his head and said, "The 8th clan will not participate in this competition." "What?" The 7th elder showed astonishment on his face, and he didn't believe his ears. The battle for the Saint Maiden is a matter of vital importance to any lineage. The 9th elder, in order to ensure that the position of the Saint Maiden falls to their lineage, did not hesitate to seriously violate the rules of the church and risk being punished with Gu to sneak into the Wangu forest. Now the 8th elder actually gave up this opportunity. The 8th elder looked at him and repeated, "The 8th lineage will not participate in the battle for the Saint Maiden. Have you thought it through?" The 7th elder's face was a little ugly. The 4th and 9th lineages were not qualified to participate in the competition because they violated the rules of the church. In this way, only the Saint Maiden of the 7th lineage was left. The woman of the 10th lineage was not weaker than the 10 elders. 7 people against 1 person, there was not much chance of winning. Now that the 8th lineage withdrew, there were only 6 people left from the 7, and their chances of winning were even lower. What if she becomes a saint? What if she doesn't? The 8th elder waved his hand and said, "I have seen through it. Power is like a floating cloud to me. I don't care whether I can become a saint or not. I don't care whether the 8th vein can grow stronger. You can make trouble by yourselves. The more veins join, the more chances of winning." The 7th elder wanted to persuade the 8th elder again, but his attitude was particularly firm. He didn't change his mind even if he spit. In the end, he could only wave his sleeves in anger and walk away. When the 7th elder conveyed the 8th elder's intention to the other elders, they were also shocked. Giving up the fight for the saint, did he take the wrong medicine? Our chances of winning were not high to begin with, wouldn't this be even lower? This doesn't seem like his style. I'll go ask him. The withdrawal of the 8th vein would weaken the strength of their alliance. Several elders went to persuade him in person, but they all returned disappointed. The 8th elder has made up his mind not to participate in the fight for the saint. They cannot make decisions for the 8th vein, and can only accept reality. Their only advantage is that they have more people, but even if 6 people join forces, the result is more losses than wins. Fortunately, the 2nd elder is very knowledgeable about the battle method. He has spared no effort in the past 2 days to teach the 6-person joint attack technique, so that now that the 6 people join forces, even they have to be extremely careful. A 10-foot-high arena has already been set up in the first vein village, which is also the venue for this 7-person competition. Half an hour ago, the 8th elder sent someone to tell Tang Ning that the 8th vein would withdraw from the fight for the saint, and told him that the other 6 veins were ready to join forces to deal with Sumei, so he should be on guard early. This incident was not unexpected by Tang Ning, and Sumei had nothing to be on guard against. From the beginning, she had planned to fight alone against many. The time was about to come, and the 7 candidates for the saintly maidens came onto the stage one after another. After they came onto the stage, the 6 took out a veil from their arms and put it on, covering their mouths and noses tightly. Gong Sunying said, "They are indeed prepared. It seems that this matter will not be so easy." Tang Ning learned from Gong Sunying that this veil was not an ordinary veil, and it had the function of preventing smoke and poisonous gas. In this way, it would be impossible to poison them silently. And this competition was crucial. The elders of the various clans would definitely give them the most powerful poisonous insects, and Sumei's advantage in poison techniques would no longer exist. Poison techniques were useless, and sorcery was also useless. However, these two were what Sumei was best at after learning the 10,000 Poison Sutra. It was obvious that they were completely teaming up to target her this time. Tang Ning glanced at Gong Sunying and Bai Jin, and asked, "Are you, the 10th branch, so unwelcome in the Gu clan?" "It's just a despicable act," Bai Jin snorted coldly, and said, "When she uses her strength to sit on the position of the saint, they will have nothing to say." Tang Ning was not worried that they would regret it after Sumei won. Under the spotlight, the 10 elders would not do such a thing, and they were very obedient to the rules of the section. Otherwise, they would not want to unite the 10 branches into one sect and revive the prestige of the past after so many years of the split of the Wangu sect. They just have their own selfish desires on the belonging of the saint. Tang Ning guessed correctly. At the beginning of the competition, the 6 people surrounded Sumei. Not only that, as soon as they made a move, they implied some kind of formation change. After seeing them change the formation several times, Tang Ning's face showed a strange look. The inheritance of the 10 branches of Gu Wu all originated from the Wangu Dujing. Sumei was much more familiar with this formation recorded in the Wangu Dujing than he was. If they attacked individually, Sumei might have to take it seriously. As luck would have it, the 6 of them actually chose the set of formations recorded in the 10,000 Poison Sutra, which was equivalent to completely exposing their weaknesses to Sumei. In this case, several people could not even maintain the most basic formation. Sumei could find the weakness of the formation every time, and then throw one person off the stage. The elders of various veins watched Sumei disrupt the formation of the 6 people again and again, making them flustered and defeated one by one, until the first vein candidate saint was also thrown out of the stage, and several elders stood there in a daze, with extremely shocked faces. After an unknown amount of time, the elder sighed lightly, looked at Sumei with a complicated look, and bowed and said, "Meet the saint." This time, she defeated the 6 people in full view of the public. Even if the 10 elders were unwilling, they had to abide by the rules set at the beginning. The elders of each clan looked at each other, even if their eyes were full of helplessness, they followed the great elder and bowed, saying loudly, "Greetings to the saint. Greetings to the saint." The members of the first clan present knelt on their knees, and their voices echoed through the valley. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 870. A new saint has been born. She is proficient in Gu and poison techniques, and her own strength is not weaker than the 10 elders. This should be a happy event for all the sects, but the elders of all the sects have a complicated mood. The 10th sect is different from the other 9 sections. They have been busy helping the descendants of the Liang royal family to restore their country for more than 10 years. Once the 10th sect is in power, it is very likely that the entire Gu tribe will be dragged into this huge vortex and there will be no recovery. At that time, all the sects will have irreconcilable conflicts with the saint because of this matter. In this way, the Wangu sect will not only not repeat the peak of the year, but will also be more seriously divided. Bai Jin, Gong Sunying, and the people of the 10th sect are naturally happy. Bai Jin has been arranging for this for more than 10 years, and finally waited for the time to bear fruit. The great elder had calmed down after the emotional upheaval just now. He walked forward, bowed slightly to Sumei, and said, "Please move to the temple, saint. We will crown the saint in 3 days. The followers of Wangu sect are all over Gizhu. It can be said that she is the master of Gizhu." The various clans decided long ago that this competition would definitely select a saint to lead Wangu section. Therefore, the leaders of the various tribes of Gu clan came here long before the 10 clans entered the Wangu forest, waiting to witness the coronation of the saint. The temple is in the main hall of Wangu sect, not far from the first clan. After everyone settled around the temple, the followers went to various villages to notify them to participate in the coronation ceremony in 3 days. Several elders gathered together, each with a worried look on their faces. What should we do? Do we really have to sacrifice all our people for the restoration of Liang? After the saint is crowned, can we disobey her orders? The elder who always looked calm sighed and said, we can only take it one step at a time. The main hall of the Wangu sect, the side hall of the Holy Temple. Since the collapse of the Wangu sect, the 10 elders have been ruling on their own. Most of the tribes and villages of the Gu clan depend on them for survival, and a small part is still loyal to the saint. In addition, many elders in the sect have stayed, waiting for the new saint to appear. Decades have passed, some elders have passed away, and some tribes have changed their masters, but their focus on the saint has not changed. As soon as Sumei arrived at the Holy Temple, countless people knelt down to greet her, shouting welcome the saint. Tang Ning was a little surprised. The Wangu sect elders who did not belong to the 10 sects were also very powerful. Their power might not be as strong as the 10 sects combined, but they were much stronger than any other sect. They were very respectful to the saint, which meant that even if the 10 elders had ulterior motives, Sumei already had a group of loyal subordinates here. In a side hall of the temple, Tang Ning looked at Sumei, who slowly walked in and smiled, "Congratulations, my saint." In response, he received a passionate and proactive kiss. It was late at night, and unknown insects were chirping outside the window. Sumei lay in Tang Ning's arms and said softly, "We finally have our own home." Tang Ning stroked a strand of her messy hair and said, "Thank you for your hard work." All of this in Kyandi was achieved by her alone. She had gone through countless hardships and obstacles along the way before she became the saint of the Wangu sect. Tang Ning stroked her hair and asked, "Leave the restoration of the country to them. After the coronation, you will come back with me." "Restore the country?" Sumei looked at him and asked, "What restoration?" Tang Ning looked at her and said in surprise, "Bai Jin and Gong Sun Ying asked you to become a saint, not just to use the power of the Wangu sect and the Gu clan to revive Liang." Sumei had a sly smile on her face and said, "But I didn't become a saint for this." Tang Ning looked at her and murmured, "You." Sumei's sly face deepened, and she said, "To revive Liang, we have to fight with the current court in Yunnan. That will kill many people, and guess who will be in chaos? This is our home. How could I destroy our home?" Tang Ning looked at her in a daze. He only realized now that Sumei had never thought about helping them restore the country from the beginning. Her goal has always been to use the power of Bai Jin, Gong Sun Ying, and the 10th vein to become the saint of the Wangu sect, control the land of Qian, and then turn this place into their home, a home where they don't have to work hard for others and can make their own decisions on everything. Tang Ning gently tapped her forehead and smiled, "You little fox." Sumei rubbed restlessly in his arms. 2 days later, the Wangu sect temple. The coronation of the saint is the most important event of the Wangu section. Everyone must bathe and change clothes 3 days in advance. During these 3 days, the believers decorated the temple with a new look. The 10 elders and the leaders of each tribe and village all stood in the temple waiting. The 9th elder disappeared strangely and was almost considered to have fled for fear of crime. The 9th vein selected a new elder 2 days before the coronation ceremony. The elders of each vein had different thoughts, only the 10th elder had a smile on his face. The saint was from their vein. From then on, the 10th vein was the leader of all veins. The plan they had prepared for more than 10 years was about to be realized. The great elder turned his head and glanced at the 10th elder, then asked in a deep voice, "You, the 10th clan, really want to involve our entire Gu clan for the sake of the descendants of the Liang kingdom's royal family?" The 10th elder snorted coldly and said, "The traitors who rebelled should be punished by everyone. It is our duty to support the Liang royal family. What reason do you have to shirk responsibility? The rise and fall of a country and the change of dynasties are common. In order to revive the previous dynasty, you will lead our Qian land into war. Is the previous dynasty of Liang more important to you than our fellow tribesmen in Qian land? The late emperor was kind to the 10th lineage. Why can't we repay him? While the two were arguing, someone suddenly shouted, "The saint is here." The two elders didn't care about the quarrel. In the temple, everyone knelt on the ground and shouted, "Welcome the saint." The coronation ceremony was very complicated, with dozens of large and small processes, which took more than an hour. During this more than an hour, everyone waited quietly in the temple, without any impatient expression on their faces. An elder of the Wangu sect stood in front of the hall and said, "Please ask the saint to grant the 10 elders a pill." Sumei followed him down and asked, "What pill?" The elder explained, "This pill is a secret recipe of the section. After the 10 elders take it, if they betray the saint can take their lives at any time." Tang Ning was standing not far away and understood what the elder said. The 10 elders are all powerful figures in the section. The Wangu sect must ensure that they will listen to the saint. It is said that granting pills is actually asking them to take poison or insects and put their lives in the hands of the saint. No wonder after the death of the previous saint, the 10 elders immediately acted on their own without the threat of life. Trust needs to be exchanged for trust. Threatening or forcing will never get real trust. Sumei looked at the pill in her hand and waved, "No need." She didn't need to control the 10 elders in this way. After the saint was crowned, the 10 veins would exist in name only. The tribes and villages under the 10 veins would return to the section. The power of the 10 elders would be greatly reduced and could no longer stir up any waves. The elder of the Wangu sect looked at her and said in embarrassment, "Saint, the sect rules are like this." Sumei glanced at him and said, "It has been changed now." Several elders looked up at him, with unprecedented brilliance in their eyes. In the Wangu sect, the orders of the saint cannot be disobeyed. The reason why the elders of all generations could not resist the saint was because their lives were controlled by the saint. With a thought from the saint, the poisonous insects in their bodies could break out of their bodies. Therefore, even if the new saint asked them to help Liang restore the country, they could not have any objections. Unexpectedly, the new saint did not want to control the 10 elders. This shocked them, and the helplessness and unwillingness in their hearts were reduced a lot. They began to look at the saint with a new look. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 871. Absolutely not. Hearing that the saint did not use gu pill to control the 10 elders, the expressions of the 10 elders changed, and they subconsciously stepped forward and spoke to stop her. As soon as the words came out, she couldn't help but feel a chill on her back. When she turned her head, she found that the other elders were staring at her sharply. Sumei glanced at her and asked, "Are you a saint or am I a saint?" Seeing her indifferent gaze, the 10th elder felt a chill in his heart. He stepped back slowly and bowed, "I made a mistake, please forgive me." Seeing this, the elders of Wangu sect didn't say anything more. After so many years, it was difficult for the sect to have a saint. There was no need to stand on the opposite side of the saint and the 10 elders because of these trivial matters. It was already the end of the coronation ceremony for the 10 elders who gave pills to the saint. After that, the leaders of many tribes of the Gu tribe came forward to salute and saw the new saint. After completing the last step, the Wangu sect elder looked at the 10 elders and asked, "The coronation of the saint is over, do the 10 elders have anything else to say?" Everyone looked at each other and stood still without speaking. At this moment, the 10 elders who had just retreated stood up again and said, "Holy Lady, Wangu sect is the state religion of Daliang. Now Daliang is being conspired and occupied by a group of rebellious officials and thieves. The subordinates think that our religion has the responsibility to help the Xiao family. Orthodoxy, revival of the beams. As soon as the 10th elder said this, the expressions of the other elders changed slightly. Among the crowd, Baijin's face showed a smile, and Gong Sunying was equally happy. She raised her head and glanced at Sumei, the smile on her face froze, and a bad premonition suddenly came into her heart. Sumei looked at the 10 elders and said, "The Liang kingdom has been destroyed, and the Xiao royal family is orthodox. They committed suicide in the palace more than 10 years ago. Now there is a new policy in Dian. In order to revive the Liang kingdom, we have hundreds of thousands of Gu clans. People are caught in the flames of war. Do you think it's appropriate?" The 10th elder looked at her blankly, speechless for a moment. "Things shouldn't be like this." Senior sister Bai and junior sister Gong soon told her that when senior nephew Su succeeds in becoming a saint, as long as she stands up and makes this request, she will use the power of the saint to instruct the entire Gu clan to help they return to the country. But how did things become like this? When the 10 elders stood there stunned, several other elders suddenly raised their heads, their eyes showing strange light. They expected that the 10 elders would make this request, but they did not expect that the saint would react like this. Isn't she a member of the 10th lineage? Didn't she become a saint just to restore the country? The development of the matter was beyond the expectations of all the elders, and they all had shocked expressions on their faces. However, he was shocked. Soon, the great elder came back to his senses and said loudly, "The saint is wise, the Liang kingdom has been destroyed, and we cannot push the people of Gizhu into the fire pit just because we want to revive the Liang kingdom." The wise saint! The wise saint! Seeing this, the elders spoke one after another. At this point, the way they looked at the new saint girl completely changed. She is proficient in the art of poisonous poison, and at such a young age, she can fight against the 10 elders without losing. If she can still consider the people of the Gu tribe wholeheartedly, then she will be the most suitable candidate for a saint. Different from the surprise and excitement of these elders, the faces of Baijin and Gong Sunying were full of gloom and anger. Baijin grimaced and gritted his teeth. What is she doing? Gong Sunying glanced at Sumei and said, "Haven't you seen it yet? From the beginning to the end, she never thought about restoring the country. We are using her, so why isn't she using us?" Baijin's face showed anger, which was the anger of finding out that she had been betrayed. She looked up at Sumei and bit out a few words through her teeth, "I really taught a good apprentice." Gong Sunying looked up at her and said, "At least, we really made her a saint." Baijin said angrily, "She doesn't want to return to the country, so what use is she to us if she becomes a saint?" Gong Sunying said, "They don't want to restore the country, just because they don't want to involve the Gu clan, but this matter is not up to them." Baijin's expression changed, he looked at her and asked, "What do you mean?" Gong Sunying glanced in the direction of the 10 elders and said, "I'm going to Yunnan. Please keep an eye on this place." Baijin looked at her and nodded slowly. Tang Ning was a little surprised. She thought Baijin and Gong Sunying would be angry because of Sumei's words during the coronation ceremony. However, after the ceremony, they acted as if nothing had happened, and even their faces were calm. Baijin and Gong Sunying have been planning this for so many years, how could they just give up like this? They must be thinking up something secretly. It seemed that even if Sumei left, she would have to instruct the elders in Wangu sect to keep an eye on them. These two junior sisters are not fuel-efficient lamps, especially Gong Sunying, who is simply a stir-up stick. Wherever she is, she can stir up trouble. The things on the grassland can already explain everything. Within the temple, the elders looked at Sumei with complete surrender. The great elder looked at her, bowed, and said, "In the next 6 months, we will summon the subjects of the Gu tribe to come and pay homage to the saint." "No need." Sumei waved her hand and said, "I'll leave tomorrow." The expressions of the elders changed, and the elder immediately asked, "May I ask where the saint is going?" Sumei said, "Go home with my husband." The faces of several elders changed again. They had never thought that the saint was married. The saint could only concentrate on the affairs of the church if she was alone and abandon those love affairs. The saints of all generations lived alone until they died. Although there was no clear ban in the church to point out this, it was already an established rule in the church. The saint was married, so they couldn't ask her to divorce. The elder looked at her and said, "The church rules stipulate that the saint must stay in the church and cannot leave Kazhu at will. Then I won't be a saint anymore. Whoever wants to be one can be one." Sume handed him the scepter and said, "I want to go home with my husband." The elder hurriedly handed the scepter back and said, "Saint, don't be impulsive. We can discuss this matter, we can discuss it." Wangu cult finally had a saint and had the hope of reuniting. How could it go back to the way it was before? She glanced at Sume and said, "Saint, please wait a moment. Let me discuss this with the elders." The elders whispered for a while before the great elder came over and said, "Saint can leave, but there is a time limit. The people of the Gu tribe still need the guidance of the saint." Sume thought for a moment and said, "At least half a year, at most a year." The elders looked at each other and nodded slightly before the great elder said, "Saint can leave Kazhu, but we have a few conditions." Sume glanced at them and said, "Tell me, what are the conditions?" The great elder said, "First, no matter what happens outside, after 1 year, the saint must come back. Candy is the way out. She left for her family, so of course she has to come back." Sume nodded and said, "I promise you." The elder continued, "Second, the saint must be accompanied by at least 2 elders when she goes out this time." Sume nodded without hesitation and said, "This one is also okay." The elder continued, "Third." Sume nodded repeatedly until the elder said the 8th point. She looked at her and said seriously, "How about letting someone else be the saint?" The elder immediately said, "The last one, the last one."